Good morning, everyone. I'm Coni Meyers, and this is my dear friend Edward Segal. Edward and I are going to be talking about when the unthinkable happens, crises and disasters, and today we're having a candid conversation about mass shootings. Edward is a contributing author for Forbes magazine, and he recently wrote an article about the FedEx shootings. And I want to just quote the first part of it, and then Edward, I'd like you to kind of address some of it. You say, oh, wait a minute, let me pull it up here. 1 second. Last week's mass shooting at the FedEx facility in Indianapolis, Indiana, is the latest reminder that there are two things all companies should have before they are needed: a crisis management plan and a team to implement them. Having one without the other will make it even more challenging to respond to a crisis and waste time that should be spent dealing with the situation. So I went back and I looked, Edward, at the different shootings over the last, and the record that I saw was 6, which FedEx was the last one. I don't know if there's been any since then or not. But all of them, with the exception, it was kind of a gray area, the one that with the grocery store, but all of them were related to some kind of a business. And so many people have been killed. So where do you even start when you try to put together a plan, or where do you start when you're trying to put together a team?
Well, thanks, Connie. It's great to be with you. And just to clarify, I am a leadership strategy contributor for Forbes.com. I don't write for the magazine.
Oh, for magazine. Okay, thank you.
But I wrote that piece for Forbes.com to provide important advice and insights to business leaders and entrepreneurs, anybody, frankly, on the best practices for getting ready for when the unthinkable happens. And in this case, the unthinkable is a mass shooting. It's an unfortunate fact of life, of business life, that companies and organizations have often been the site of mass shootings. And whether it's a flood or an accident or a mass shooting, businesses and organizations need to be prepared for when the worst case scenario becomes a living nightmare. And I outline in the article and in my book the steps that companies and organizations should take to prepare a crisis management plan, to practice the plan, and to update the plan so that when any crisis happens, they'll be prepared and can deal with it as soon as possible.
What is the most important part about putting together a team? What do you need to look for when you're putting together a crisis team?
You need to have the right people doing the right things and working together. What those functions are really depends on the nature of the crisis, and who you have involved on your team is really a function of how large your company is, the industry or profession, and where your company is located. But typical people, typical categories of people who are often part of a crisis management team will include someone from the HR department, someone from the legal team, someone from IT. If you have people who are members of a union at your organization, someone from the union would be a good choice as well. You don't want to make it a large, unwieldy team. It should be the right people. They should have their defined duties and responsibilities, and they should meet several times throughout the year to make sure that they can work together, are very familiar with the crisis management plan. And so as soon as the plan is activated, the team is activated and gets to work as well.
I in my crisis knowledge management certification, I write about a crisis management team. And one of the things that I talk about is you might be the perfect leader for your company or your business, but you may not be the right person to lead a crisis management team. If you are more sales oriented, and you may not be detail oriented, or you may not really understand what needs to be done, or may not have the skills, then somebody else should lead that team. Is that your opinion as well?
That's a very good point, Connie. Yes, sometimes the worst person to lead the team is the CEO or chairman of the board of the company. They usually have their hands full running the company, And the last thing that they should be doing is taking their eyes off the ball and working on a crisis. They should be kept informed, however, by the team leader about the crisis, what's being done, how it's being done, have any resources that they need throughout the organization. But I think the top person of a company should be aware of the crisis, but they should not necessarily be leading the response team to it. And the other reality is, no one should have to carry this burden on their shoulders by themselves. It is a team effort. It should be a team approach. And the other reality is that companies and organizations, they may not have the resources they need to deal with the crisis, even among members of the team. So part of the value of having a crisis management plan and testing it is to identify the areas where your organization might be weak, might not have the resources, and don't wait until your crisis happens. Reach out now to have those resources in place so that when you have to activate the plan and the team, everything's there ready to go, and you won't be wasting any time dealing with the crisis itself.
That is so important. And you know, a lot, I mean, 75% of all business out there is small business. And those people typically don't have the kind of resources that you're talking about. I mean, a good example of that was the spas that were hit in Atlanta. I mean, those were all small businesses. And I'm sure none of them even thought about having any type of a crisis plan. Any recommendations or resources you might be able to give for small businesses like that, where they might find the right kind of resources? Where do they even go to look?
Well, sometimes they may have resources they're not even aware of. A common crisis is something accounting related, attempted forgery or embezzlement of the funds of the organization. Talk to your accountant, talk to your CPA. One kind of crisis that can happen to any organization at any time are lawsuits, allegations of sexual harassment, those kind of crisis situations. Talk to your attorney or members of your legal team about the steps you can take now from preventing those crises from becoming a reality, and then have their expertise available if the worst case happens and you are sued for any reason at all. You might also reach out to the trade or associations, professional groups, industry organizations you might belong to. They might have great resources to help you prepare for a crisis or to deal with a crisis when the worst case scenario becomes a reality.
You know, it's been very recent that there was it wasn't a mass shooting, but it was a shooting of a real estate agent. And I didn't realize it, but real estate agent career is considered one of the riskiest in the country. And there's a whole conversation going on right now about carrying a gun or not carrying a gun. And I think these mass shootings just really amplify the need for knowing what it is you are going to do and having that plan and making sure that everybody in your organization knows, whether you're a little tiny mom and pop organization or you're a company like FedEx. So with the FedEx shootings, since you wrote the article, what do you think that they did right, and what do you think they may have done better?
Well, I can only judge by the news reports, and it appears that they did the right things the right way for the right reason. The police and other law enforcement officials were immediately notified. The stories that I read, it looked like that they deferred to the law enforcement officials. Any comments? It was the police who held the news conference. In any situation, you have to defer to the experts, to the authorities who are in charge, whether it's an investigation, and especially with a mass shooting. The last thing an organization wants to do when there's business has been the site of such a tragedy is to investigate it themselves. Step aside, let the experts, let the law enforcement personnel do their job. It's appropriate to get briefings from law enforcement about the status of what happened, why it happened, and how it happened. But unless you're asked as a CEO to speak at the news conference or to speak to the press about the tragedy, I would step aside and let the experts do their work.
That's such an important point. Let's talk a little bit about the press. Just a little bit about that. And obviously that it's a very emotional um, incident that happens. Everybody is upset, and you definitely don't want to have somebody that just is going to go off at the mouth talking to the press. I mean, that could be bad news for sure for the company.
Well, as you always want to have as part of your crisis management team, someone who, when it is appropriate, serves as a spokesperson for the company and organization. And you need to have training before you talk to the press. It is an art, it is a science, it is its whole discipline on the best way to represent a company and organization, especially in a crisis. So one of the things that I offer for my clients is media training, where I put them through a series of exercises to see how well they would do in a pressure situation, talking about a crisis, and then ask them some very pointed questions and see how they respond to those situations. But just as you need to practice your plan to ensure it works, you should get media training and periodic refresher courses in media training to ensure that you can talk to the press when it's appropriate and you are conveying the right information the right way and the right time to news organizations about the crisis. The other thing I recommend is to pay attention to crisis situations that are happening, unfortunately, all too often these days, especially mass shootings, and to pay very close attention how when there is a news conference, who's talking, what are they saying, how well are they doing, and put yourself in their shoes. If you had to represent your company to discuss a mass shooting or other tragedy, what would you say and how would you say it? And what are the lessons that you can learn from how others who are in the situation now, how are they handling themselves, and what can you learn from their example?
What would you say is the number one biggest mistake that people make that when they get in front of the press?
Talking too much. It's really important to talk in what we call sound bites, little snippets. The more information you share, the longer that you talk in answering reporters' questions, the more likely it is that you may get off point. And I compare time to a rope. The longer you talk, the more likely it is you're going to hang yourself and get into trouble. Most answers for questions, you don't want it to go more than 30 or 40 seconds because the longer you talk, the less control you're going to have. And when you answer any question about a mass shooting or any crisis or any tragedy, you should always go into that interview or press conference situation knowing what you want to get out of it. You should have 3 or 4 major points that you want to convey. Find an opportunity to touch on 1, 2, or all 3 of those points in every answer, and do the best job that you can, knowing ahead of time what you want to say, and finding every opportunity to interview to go back to those main points. And that's another value of the media training. The more practice that you have ahead of time, that will help provide you with a level of confidence and assurance that when you are in the public spotlight, you'll do the best possible job of representing your company or your organization.
That is such an important point. And there's so many different avenues where you might get caught in front of the press. I mean, you may not even, it certainly doesn't have to be a major crisis. You could have some kind of an other issue that's maybe not a big issue, but a little issue. And really knowing how to handle that is invaluable information. So when it comes to a plan, so you've got your crisis management team, and in the situation like FedEx or the grocery store, those you have consumers involved, you have employees involved. How much involvement should you have with your employees? I mean, I'm sure you need to have do practice and drills and things like that. But how much should you involve your other employees in what needs to be done?
Well, you should have as appropriate members of your workforce represented on the crisis response team. But again, you don't want to make it a large, unwieldy committee. It is not a team sport. It's not a competition. It should be a small group of people that can work well together. However, in any crisis, whether it's a mass shooting or other situation, you always need to keep all of the employees throughout your organization posted at every step of the way. You should treat your employees as if they were goodwill ambassadors for your company. Uh, every one of your employees would likely have a family and the friends and colleagues, and it's kind of like a 1 to 100 ratio. Every one person in your company could represent at least 100 other people, whether friends or family or people they know in the community. So keep your employees posted as is appropriate about the crisis. Provide them the information. Communicate them the way they're used to hearing from you, whether it's an email or a direct message, posting information on your website. And always remember, when you're talking to your employees, you're talking to multiple audiences who will learn from that employee information about the crisis. So you're not just talking to one person, you're talking to hundreds or thousands of people that one employee knows. But keep them posted, and they can help you do a good job communicating information about your crisis to the public.
I'd like to kind of address also, as a consumer, as you're walking into, say, a spa or a grocery store, or, I mean, you're not expecting to have to face something like this, but it is a reality of our times today of what is happening. And so I talk about it in my course. I talk about you really need to, when you walk into a restaurant, or you walk into a movie theater, or you walk into the grocery store, be familiar with where the other exits are. Just take a glance around and say, okay, if somebody's coming through the front door, where's the back door? My cousin has a friend who is high up in the services. And whenever they go to the movie theater, he stops and looks around for a second to make sure he knows where the exits are, and just to kind of get a feel for the room. So I think it's really important to really address as well what employees can do if you are part of an organization that this has happened to. And well, again, whether it's big or small, you just need to be aware, but also the consumer needs to be aware. So I tell people, make sure you look around and know the other exits. If you get a sense that something doesn't feel right, get up and leave. Just making sure, I mean, it's terrible when you think that a disgruntled employee, we just had this happen in Vegas about 2 years ago. It was a counseling office, and one of their patients came in and shot 2 people, a receptionist, and because he was not happy with whatever was happening, whatever was going on with him. And unfortunately, we just never know where it's going to come from.
That is very good, sound advice. It's also an unfortunate sign of the times that we have to think in those terms, but it's better to be safe than sorry, better to be aware of your surroundings. I have friends who, when they go into a restaurant, they refuse to sit with their back to the door. They want to see who's coming in at all times. They don't want to be surprised. They would rather sit near the front of the restaurant in case they have to leave suddenly for whatever reason. But I also think it's really important to be aware of your surroundings at all times. With all the mass shootings happening, unfortunately, at so many businesses and organizations, you do need to have your antenna up at all times. You need to be aware. You need to pay attention to unfamiliar people or friends or colleagues at work who might be acting in a strange or unusual manner. And just as you should be aware of your surroundings in a restaurant or a store and know how to get out quickly if necessary, it's better to have that same healthy approach and attitude at work. Again, I'm sorry we have to give this kind of advice to people who are listening, but these are times that are demanding special attention. And the more you're aware, the more likely it is that you can protect yourself in a crisis situation.
You know, I think I know 2 people. One was my sister. She and her friend were in a mall, and they were in a department store. The good news is they were at the jewelry department, so it was right by the front door. And there was a thing that came over, you know, guns. I don't know what they said exactly, but anyway, they were able to run out the door. My other friend was also at a mall. This was in Texas, and she and her daughter were in a department store looking at clothes. And they had to duck into a storage room where clothes were being stored, and they had to stay in there with the doors locked. So you want to make sure. The other thing I think we should mention is that if you're in that situation, make sure you turn your cell phone off. Don't even have it be on on the vibrate, make sure that it's completely off. And then when it's safe, like they started to come out of the room, out of the storage room, and they were actually told to go back in because it was not safe yet. So, and it turned out the one that my sister, there was a gun. The one at the other mall, it turned out it was not a shooting situation. But it is good to note that at least the mall took quick action just to make sure nobody got hurt. But it's really terrible when you know somebody at this point that has gone through that. That's the horrible part of it. Even, it's kind of like, we all know somebody's had a car accident. All of a sudden, it's kind of like we all know somebody that has been involved, like the mass shooting that happened here in Las Vegas. There were 54 people killed. The good news is my stepson and his wife were going to go, and they said they were too tired. They didn't, but I do know 2 people that were there, and it's just, I mean, I'm just one individual, so we're all unfortunately becoming aware of somebody that's had to face that situation, which I think it makes it even more important that we understand and do be very aware. And if you get that, my friend Tracy Hawkins, the safety lady in real estate, she talks about if you get the hairs on the back of your neck coming up, it's time to move, time to do something, and time to react. So, well, any last words you'd like to have on this topic, and then I want to talk a little bit about your book.
My advice is prepare. Whether you are the head of a company or an organization, or you're an employee in that company, take the steps now to ensure that you are prepared when the worst case scenario comes to pass. If you are head up a company, make sure you have a crisis management plan. Make sure the plan has been updated. Make sure that you have practiced the plan on a regular basis to ensure it will work when necessary, and take steps now to appoint your crisis management team. Without a plan and without a team, you're going to be losing important, valuable time when you do have a crisis, putting those plans together and assembling your team. So as soon as you have a plan in place, practice it, and don't wait to put that team in place. Do it now so you'll be prepared as possible for any crisis situation.
And I would like to add to that when we touched on it. If you're a small business and you don't have team that's within your organization, look for other people around you, or like Edward talked about, your accountant or security people that people that can help to give you. There's plenty of training out there now for businesses to go and get good training on how to put together a team and that. So Edward's book. So Edward, tell us a little bit about Crisis Ahead, and I'll pull the picture up for a second here.
Well, thank you, Connie. I wrote the book, Crisis Ahead, as a how-to guide for businesses, organizations, and high-profile individuals on how to get ready for, how to respond, how to manage, and importantly, how to recover from a crisis situation. And I have in the book dozens of different scenarios that readers can go through to see how they would respond to a worst case crisis trigger situation, and what would they do. And I have more than 100 mini case studies of how well, and sometimes how poorly businesses have done in responding to a crisis, and what you can learn from their successes or failures. I also have in the book a crisis management plan template that can be easily customized for any company or any organization in any industry or any profession. And as a public service, if people who are listening to us today, if they will send me an email to crisisahead@gmail.com, that's the title of the book, crisisahead@gmail.com, I'll be glad to send them a Word version of the crisis plan that they can start customizing right away. And be as prepared as possible for a crisis. And the other thing I have in the book is some examples of how it is possible to recover from a crisis. And I profile well-known companies and organizations on how they went through a crisis, how they recovered from a crisis. And all of this is designed to help the readers of the book be as prepared as possible for a crisis, and to take steps now to limit any risk that might trigger a crisis, and eliminate that as possibilities Of course, what I tell in the book, it's impossible to protect yourself from every form of crisis. Crisis will happen, but with the advice in the book, I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for people to be as prepared for a crisis, and they can deal with it and recover from it as soon as possible.
Thank you so much for that, because I think that's really critically important. Um, I have a website called ckmsolutionsgroup.com. And on there is some information about my crisis knowledge management certification course. We touch on mass shootings. We touch on man-made disasters as well as natural disasters. We talk about crisis management teams. And it's applicable whether it's a crisis or whether it's a disaster, a natural or man-made disaster. But you really want to be informed. And once you go and take the course, Crisis Knowledge Management Certification, you become a CKM advisor. And then you have the opportunity to go out to your community, to your church, to your schools, to your civic organizations, and talk about how to be better prepared. And just think of what a benefit it would be if you are out there and you are helping businesses be prepared for anything, including mass shootings. What is that going to do to your business? It's going to make you shine. It's going to make you more visible. So you're out there giving back and making a difference, but you're also out there making your business more visible. So just go to ckmsolutionsgroup.com. I have a couple trainings coming up. I would love for you to join us in that. You can also download a book that Edward and I are in for free. It's called Leadership in Trying Times. And we are two of several other authors that give invaluable points on how to be a good leader for your business as well as your personal life. So I highly recommend you come to my website, download the book, send Edward, what's your email address again?
It's crisisahead@gmail.com. The title of the book, crisisahead@gmail.com. I also encourage people to check out my stories on Forbes.com, where I'm the leadership strategy contributor. Just look for me on Forbes.com, or you can go directly to the leadership strategy site. And I write on a very regular basis how companies and organizations in the news, how they are doing, and the lessons to be learned. And by being a student of crisis situations that others are going through, that's another great way to help increase your knowledge and expertise in dealing with a crisis when, not if, your company has one.
I have to say, I really enjoy your articles. I sometimes get a little behind. I have to catch up because you write so much. So you were telling me just before we went live how many hits you're getting on your articles. Can you share that?
Well, I've been writing for Forbes.com since October. And just this morning, I'm now past 400,000 views of my page and articles. So I'm really glad to be sharing my knowledge and my expertise with my readers. And I urge you, if you haven't read my stories yet, I've written more than 100 over the last few weeks, talking about various topics, various issues, various crisis situations. I'm writing almost on a daily basis now, so it's a great way to continue your education. And I'm also looking for story ideas. If companies and organizations have a good story angle, they think they might be a good fit for my column. It has to be crisis related, of course. Please reach out. I'd be glad to hear from you, and send me the email at crisisahead@gmail.com.
And Edward and I are going to be doing this on a monthly basis now. So tune back in. We won't know what we're going to be talking about next month until we decided the topic on Monday, because we wanted to make sure that we were talking about the latest crisis or disaster, and doesn't matter which one. There's always plenty to have to talk about. So thank you, Edward. I'd also like to encourage you all to come and check out my training to become a CKM advisor. And a lot of what he's talking about here is going to be, I'm reading from his articles and I'm quoting from his articles. So we'll be doing a lot more training when it comes to crisis. So thank you, Edward, so much. I think this was a fun first start. I was really sorry. It was kind of such a terrible topic that we had to talk about, but I think it's better to talk about it and get the information out first, and maybe help somebody out there, maybe save a life. Who knows?
I agree.
All right, everybody. This is we're going to be signing out. Edward Segal, Coni Meyers. We're hope that you got some valuable information in this conversation, and we will be posting when we'll be doing the next one and what the topic is shortly. Everybody have a great, wonderful day and stay safe.